Okay, so as I'm sure most of you are aware now, Zeb Wells' Spider-Man run has come to an end with issue 60, marking a 2-year run for the character under the writer. Unfortunately for Wells, this run may go down as the worst run of Spider-Man's entire history, and even if it doesn't, it certainly will go down as the most controversial run, sparking multiple internet debate for the wrong reasons. In this video, now that Wells' run is over, I'm going to give a quick overview and review of the run as a whole, encapsulating my thoughts just before we move on to Joe Kelly's 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Although Wells showed promise in some areas of the stories he tried to convey, overall the stories never really hit the mark. They always felt contrived, convenient, and in some places even felt like fanfiction. The switch and change between the grounded stories like Gang War and the Tombstone stuff to Raven and the split with Mary Jane has always been really jarring in my eyes. Not to mention characters like Paul, who is a one-dimensional plot device for a very forced split between Peter and MJ. However, I believe Zeb Wells is and still remains a good, heck even great writer after his time on Spider-Man. And that might seem like a wild statement, but I bet many of you don't actually know this. He was actually a big part of the writing team for Deadpool and Wolverine, the film that fans loved across the board, and some who were also a part of the same group hating on The Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, Zeb Wells had a hand in writing both. But Zeb Wells is meant to be a bad writer, right? Are we sure? Is this really Zeb Wells' fault? But before we pick apart what really went wrong and why, let's start with a more positive note. Despite this run being very controversial, there's actually a lot of what Wells did right. I know I'll probably get stick for this, but I'm going to be completely honest. I think us as fans were a tad bit overreactive. Because when you peel back what this run got wrong, there is actually some bits of genuine substance in here, where Wells clearly demonstrates that he is a capable writer. The story that I always point towards in reference to this is the Judgment Day crossover event, where I think Spider-Man's side of the story was actually pretty good. If you guys don't remember, Judgment Day was the Marvel comic event where the Celestials tested humanity's morality, and by doing so, people from your past would come back. In Peter's case, this was his greatest mistake, and of course, that is Gwen Stacy. And it actually worked pretty well. Nonetheless, the Tombstone stuff at the start of the run also goes severely overlooked. Most people were so worked up about what they were doing with Peter and MJ that everyone looked past the very entertaining and, quite frankly, very engaging side of the Tombstone and Spider-Man rivalry. This was then revisited at the end of the run, and once again, Wells delivered. But apart from a few decent solo stories here and there, this run didn't really do much else that I can praise. I would like to praise Peter's new girlfriend, Shay Markin, as I think at the very least it's interesting that these books are actually giving us new characters. But from what I can see, and also going forward in 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, she doesn't really seem that important yet, if not at all. So I don't really have anything to say there. And I guess that leads us on nicely to... Now buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because we might be here for a while. Now, I want to make something very clear. I don't want to spend too much time sat here glazing over individual stories or characters, because we've overdone that on this channel a million times, let alone other YouTubers and the entire internet as a whole. So I'm going to try and come at this from a different angle. So instead of complaining about Norman Osborn and why he shouldn't be friends with Peter, or complaining about Paul for like the god-gazillionth time, I'm actually going to suggest that all of this run's main problems, from Paul to the Norman stuff and to Peter and MJ's split, all stem from one main casualty. This run doesn't ever do anything different. Sure, these books are new, these stories are new, but are they really? When you really dig deep under the surface and peel back the artwork and the pages, is there anything new here? Any new substance whatsoever? Yes, there are certain events that happen that are completely unique to this run, like Kamala Khan's death, or the invasion on Earth from Raven, but take all that away and look at some of the run's stories at face value, and they sound awfully dull, stale, and even familiar. Just so you can sort of grasp what I'm trying to say, here are some examples. Number 1, Peter and MJ go through a breakup after facing instability in their relationship because Peter is Spider-Man. Okay. Number 2, Norman Osborn is at Oscorp, and that leads him to becoming the Green Goblin. Alright. Number 3, Peter is broke, down on his luck and living out of an apartment that he can't afford, and he struggles to work because of Spider-Man. Okay. Number 4, a new character is introduced which creates a divide between Peter and Mary Jane. Alright, you're messing with me here. Number 5, during Peter's downtime in between relationships, he sparks up a fling with Black Cat. Oh my, do I need to go on? I mean, come on. These are all stories, concepts, and ideas that have been explored countless times in the past, either in the same comic and story or in adaptations of their own. Yes, there may be some uniqueness to some of the stories that are written here, but generally, and from a basic underlying standpoint, all of these stories are things and ideas that we've seen 1,000,000 times over. It's almost as if Peter Parker doesn't develop as a character. And that's the big takeaway. You can criticize Zeb Wells all you want for this run, and that's fine. Art is subjective, right? If you aren't a fan of his writing style, if you aren't a fan of his dialogue, if you aren't a fan of his characterization of the webhead, that is completely fine. But did Wells ever have a choice but to write Peter this way? Did Wells ever have a choice to write these stories into this book? Is this really Wells' fault? Now, at this point, you might be thinking, Lewis, where are you coming from? Now, to hit the nail in the coffin and to hit home my point with absolute validity, I want to read you an extract from Nick Lowe answering some fan mail in one of the later issues of the run. The question, which sounded like it came from a very sincere Spider-Man fan, asked whether Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita Sr. would have wanted Peter's life to develop past this constant rehashing of the same old stories, and would want him to grow up, and would want his story to move forward. And this is what Nick Lowe had to say in response to that fan mail. As to your bigger question, would Stan and Steve and John want Peter's life to develop? I'm not sure, and I can't speak for them. I certainly don't think they had a definite plan for such development, as they had no way of knowing this book would last for decades past their time on the book. I've come to think that Spider-Man growing, aging, and developing his life along with a reader in Amazing Spider-Man isn't the way to go. I believe that Spider-Man belongs to all fans and generations and should mostly be as universally relatable as possible. Why just mostly? Well, we should still do stories like Superior Spider-Man, Worldwide, and beyond that drastically change Spidey, but then come home to the core of Spider-Man. So, I'll ask again. Is this really Zeb Wells' fault? Nick Lowe has said directly in this quote that Spider-Man should be as universally relatable as possible, and he should always come home to the core of the character. While I do agree partially with this statement, because Spider-Man is for everyone, and you still have to keep some of that relatability there are two main issues with this. Number 1, you alienate your fans who have grown up with the book and invested so much time into the character just for the main protagonist not to change at all. And number 2, you risk rehashing the same stories over and over again. And that second point is exactly what Zeb Wells' run is victim of. And that first point is exactly how all of us feel about it. At the end of the day, Wells is responsible for making these books good, and some of the criticism should lie upon him for that. And I don't disagree that we can criticize Zeb Wells because we do have direct comparisons like Dan Slott and Nick Spencer, who also worked under a very heavy Marvel editorial mandate. However, when writers are being confined to certain mandates by editorial, it doesn't allow them to do new, fresh, and interesting things. When you don't allow writers to be writers, of course the book is going to feel stale, or it's going to feel rehashing, or it's going to feel boring. So, I'll end this video by asking the question once more. Was this really Zeb Wells' fault? Thank you for watching.